Hello, everyone. Welcome to interview number 4 of Mindblock Week. This is the second interview series that we are doing here at OC University. In case you guys are new, OC University is this improvement-focused OSU hub, OSU community, where our goal is to sort of bridge that gap between top players and the general community. And in keeping with that theme, something we do here is these interview series where we pick one topic and do interviews with multiple different players throughout the week. So this week we have been doing interviews on Mindblock, and joining me today for the fourth interview of the week is Woey. Hello, Woey.
Hi, it's honestly an honor to be a part of the series. You told me about it and I was absolutely on board. So
Oh my
hello,
god. Well,
thank you for having me.
let's go. So just as a brief introduction, in case people don't recognize your name for some reason, if you could give a brief introduction as to who you are in the community and what people probably recognize you as.
Okay, well, I am Woey. Um, I think probably what people most know me for is playing understarred gimmick maps, showing up on a bunch of different kinds of leaderboards, and maybe even through tournaments.
I think there's this term that people use sometimes called Woey map, or basically it's that kind of map that no one like puts in the effort, or no one has the courage, rather, to take on getting a good score on those kinds of maps that you happen to just be really, really
Yeah.
good at. Um,
Either because it is like it's unconventional in some way, or I think almost as often because it requires a lot of patience because a lot of the map is like very slow and then it transitions into a very annoying part, and that's
ye-
the kind of thing that not a lot of people like to put
yeah,
hours into.
I get that. Yeah, definitely. As you get more into it, if you look into Wowie's different scores and his number one scores, you'll start to get a natural sense for what a Wowie map is. um, and
Very honored to have that term coined.
um, and in that sense, I think mind block is something that plays a larger role, especially in more unconventional, unintuitive types of maps,
Hmm.
where you it does sort of take some learning in the first place to get the rhythm down and things like that. So it can be a lot trickier to, like, I guess if someone relies on sight read magic, for example, um, then they won't really be able to learn the entire map without getting mind blocked at some point, and that's something that we can touch on as well in your experience. But um,
Sure.
first, I just want to give a brief introduction to what mind block is as a whole, especially from your standpoint. Obviously, we've been talking about it in the other interviews, but yeah, what would you say is really what mind block is, basically?
To my mind, someone is like mind blocked on a pattern if they should like in all regards be able to hit it, and then despite that end up missing it in the same way over and over and over. Maybe that's a little more specific than like I'm not sure. I
No,
can speak it out more generally though.
that sounds right, actually. And your emphasis on like missing in the same way over and over is definitely a key sort of characteristic. So yeah, that definition actually seems pretty spot on. Um, but okay, so I guess we can start by talking about what sorts of factors like contribute to mind block, or really what causes mind block, basically.
Right. Well, I was thinking about it yesterday. I was looking at the flowchart that you made, and I was trying to like interpret it in my own way where
Oh,
mind block would come from, and I almost feel like it comes from a um I guess a surprising lack of fundamental gameplay elements, even
oh,
though like when you described that yourself, that was in relation to like two-star maps,
right.
but I find that at least in my experience, a lot of the times when mind block happens, it could stem from a sort of bypassing of those fundamentals, I guess. Like if you're playing something that might be a little um too hard for you,
Right.
mind blocking might become a lot more common, I suppose.
Okay, that's actually a really good point because um yeah, I think regarding like just being able to play fundamental basic patterns, I think really at the core of that is like being able to take one object at a time. And if you're
Hmm.
not able to do that, then you can sort of like blend objects together in your head when you're trying to read, or in general just kind of get confused and not be able to focus on each individual object. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah, because like in my, at least how I view myself is that compared to other top players, I maybe don't push the boundaries of what I can do as much as others. So for myself, I might have a little more um familiarity with that area than some people, which is why I personally don't get mind blocked as much. It's just a thought that came across my mind a few days ago.
oh, well, you mean like since your like general like skill range that you're very comfortable on is has like
Yeah, like I spend a lot of hours in like the 5 or 6 star range, so I wouldn't tend to get mind blocked in that zone of difficulty.
so would you say that's because you're very familiar with those maps, or just because you know that you're able to play them very well, or both?
I think both, and I think also it's just a matter of time. It's like you put enough hours into something, and it won't happen. Like mistakes won't happen as much, I guess.
Okay, so like I guess over time you've just gotten more and more comfortable with like the maps that are within your skill range, and the how do I word this? Those maps that are both within your skill range and also the ones that you play the most often.
Yeah, that's the idea at least.
Okay. So but I do want to ask you about that and sort of connect it back to your like what you said about like you like by all means should be able to hit a certain pattern. Like it's definitely within your skill range. And
Hmm.
still you miss in the same way every time. So what exactly do you think causes that or makes that more likely to happen?
Um,
And
Honestly, it sometimes it does sometimes feel random, but I do think a lot of the time that like if somehow if you feel like there's a possibility for you to become mind blocked, it becomes more likely to happen.
oh, so
Um,
self-fulfilling prophecy.
I at least in my from my perspective, that seems to be maybe not a factor with some people, but not entirely out of the question because sometimes it's hard to put a finger on it exactly.
So
Like I'm trying to find a good concrete answer for that, and it's hard.
yeah, it is hard, definitely. I think mind block is one of those very abstract elements of the game. But I think, and if I can try to summarize what you're sort of getting at, is y- like the more you sort of over or like try to over focus or hyper focus can sometimes like loop around backwards and then you like aren't focused at all on a certain
Yes,
pattern.
absolutely.
Um, so yeah, okay, so I guess I'll ask it this way. Like in what sense do you think focus and or the lack thereof, like what do you think the role is in focus and mind block?
I I think the role of focus is to not. I think if a person is focused, then they're not really thinking about what they're doing very much at all, which seems backwards. But at least in my experience, if I try to force something, like if I see um, in a replay how I'm missing in a certain way, if I try to fix that specific blunder, it will very often lead to um, a lack of focus in other areas. So then, like six of one, half a dozen of the other, I suppose.
Oh, so I guess you're saying if you focus on one pattern that you're mind blocked on in order to make sure you hit it, then you end up not focusing on other patterns, basically.
Sometimes,
Okay.
sometimes, if you're not careful.
Uh, so what would you say is like healthy way to go about that or to tackle a mind block that you have?
Um, well, I think it would be largely that. Like I was just thinking why mind block happens isn't necessarily as important as a good um plan of action in terms of fixing it. And in that respect, the feature on um the cutting edge client is very nice in terms of watching your replays so that you can like it's very easy to speed through a replay very fast and see where you're uh going wrong and even like pause the replay entirely because I
Oh,
think studying a replay trying to see exactly what you're doing the very small like intricacies of it I think is something that is the importance of that cannot be overstated.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure what you're talking about is like on cutting edge when you're watching a replay, you can press some numbers as like hotkeys on your keyboard to
Yes.
speed up the
Yes.
replay. Right. So I think for those of you who don't know about this, so if you press 6 on your keyboard, that sets the map to normal speed. 7 through 9 speeds it up, and then 5 makes it go frame by frame. I think that's right, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So in what he's talking about is like you can use that feature to speed through a replay of yours more quickly to analyze it, and then you can press 5 to slow it down. And there are some third-party programs as well out there that are really good for analyzing your replays as well, and like
Hmm.
checking out how you miss. So, um,
There's even a there's a Discord account that I use personally where like I don't even need a program. I can just put my replay into the DM and it will um give me all of those the misses that I had in that replay. That's
oh,
called Miss Analyzer. I don't know the number, but I'm
is Discord bot?
uh
Okay, if you let me
yeah,
know, I think let me know after, and I will link it in the YouTube description for those people listening on YouTube.
sure,
So,
sure.
okay,
But the point is that there's many different ways to study what you're doing wrong when you're mind blocked, and I think that studying that and using that information effectively to fix what you're doing, like that, it's super important. And I don't think that like people who just say, "Oh, they're mind blocked after 3 or 5 plays on a map," and then go away and then play another map and oh I'm mind blocked after 3 or 5 tries they could absolutely like that could save them that could absolutely make them so much better just instantly.
so would you say because that's actually a good point, and I think there's players out there that sort of self-identify as someone who just gets mind blocked easily naturally. Um, do you think that mind block is well? Actually, I'll take the wording of this question from the Google forum. There was an anonymous person who asked, "Do you think that mind block is something that people make up to have an excuse for their bad reading, or?"
Ooh, that is a loaded question. I think I don't know if it's an excuse. I think an excuse would be a harsh way to put it, but I think that bad reading can absolutely exacerbate a mind block problem. Yes,
Right. Or like if you're really bad at reading, it could make you more prone or more likely to get mind blocked more easily.
definitely. Though there are still some people I know who would like I don't know, bad reading might not matter to them too much because their muscle memory they can just trust it, I guess. If that makes sense.
Right.
I mean everyone's different basically.
Okay, that's actually a good point because you could have really bad reading, but if you know how to memorize maps properly and know how to like definitely fixing a mind block and having good reading are like two different skills. So if you're just very good at memorizing maps and you know how to like get around mind blocks if they start to happen, um, then there's definitely a difference. You can have pretty bad reading, but still be very good at not getting mind blocked. So,
I yes, absolutely. And I would also I'm seeing a bunch of the some of the questions here and how that could relate to um easy reading. and I don't think any. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head who is super proficient at easy and also gets mind blocked all the time. So
Oh,
that's an interesting sort of connection there, I think.
do you have any ideas as to like what probably causes that?
I think reading easy it absolutely necessitates a different kind of reading compared to reading AR9 and higher. Um, I think it has something to maybe trying to get really good accuracy is a factor of um mind block because we were talking about um with focus trying to force yourself to do a particular move, and that can tend to loop back and cause you to do worse than if you weren't trying as hard. And I think almost that like I think the factor that easy doesn't have as much of an accuracy factor allows people to just sort of play a map not hindered by the rhythm of it, which is kind of a
Oh,
weird way to put it, but that's something I've found recently that's helped me a lot. Is that ignoring accuracy entirely, ironically, doesn't actually make my accuracy that much worse, and it makes me feel way more comfortable playing. So I think what you can learn from playing easy is like very important in that way.
so you're saying like it sort of shifts your attention away from spending so much of your focus on just accuracy and the rhythm of the map that you can focus a lot more on processing the patterns and making sure that your aim and tapping and everything else mechanics wise is on point.
Yeah, I feel like I went through a little bit of a tangent there. I'm
No,
glad
no,
that you made it reasonable to interpret.
no. Yeah, I think that is a really good point. I know players have also mentioned easy reading in the sense of getting better at mind block. I do want to be a little careful here because I don't want the message to come across as like play more easy and you will fix your mind blocks because that's also not exactly what we're trying to say. Um, so, but I think it's more like the I guess requirements that reading easy has in the sense of that for one, I think like you mentioned naturally, and that's a really good point. I've never actually thought about that, but the fact that accuracy is a lot easier, the OD gets cut in half with easy, so it's a lot easier to act. Um, just that alone makes you focus a bit more on reading things more easily or more comfortably as well and more clearly. And another thing about pattern processing in general, right? Like since it's so dense, and this is something that you can probably elaborate on. Since easy is has such low AR and you need to keep track of so much at the same time, breaking down patterns in more digestible ways. Um, that's something that we've definitely touched on in some of the previous interviews, but I want to get your opinion on that as well. Like how that. Well, okay, let's step back from easy mod for a second, but
Yeah.
just being like being able to process patterns in different ways. How do you think that plays a role in mind block or fixing mind block?
I think that is the quintessential part of getting better at adjusting mind block. I think that is the single most important aspect of it because I think mind block. I actually just bringing that up made me remember. I think mind block most often happens when a player reads a pattern in one specific way and that way doesn't work, and then they don't know how to change that. So they just
Oh,
get stuck in this bad way of reading forever.
okay. That's actually another really good way to define mind block is like only it's like not having alternative ways to read a certain pattern. Like you get fixated in one way, and that way doesn't work, and you don't know what else to try. So,
Yes.
um, right. So could you elaborate on that?
Okay. So probably the most um common example is someone doesn't know how to um aim a square. And
Right.
someone says, okay, instead of reading it as a group of four, split it up as a group of make it a 1-2-1-2. So one note in the bottom left, two goes up to the top left, and then a brand new combo, one in the top right, down to the bottom right.
Right, so I guess instead of just processing the square as like four notes that are all attached to each other, you try to make a distinction in your head between the first two notes and the second two notes. You focus on them separately as more simple and digestible bits or chunks. I usually like to call them chunks. I'm not sure if there's really a term
I
for
like
that.
that.
Um, yeah, chunking. Yeah, I usually call it chunking. But there's really no term for it, I feel like. But yeah, breaking patterns down. So could you, I guess, give more of a like principle of like how you can discover different ways to read a certain pattern? Because there's some patterns that are like super crazy, wonky, like hexagon type old map, weird, those like linear things where it's
Right.
like an S, right, of like a bunch of circles in a single type. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
Um,
I do.
Stuff like that, that like you can't just, well, sometimes I guess you can just do like 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, but do you have any strategies that you like to use to like group things in more simple ways?
Well, I think with that sort of with sort of older maps that do tend to be more linear, I think those are the sort of points when I like to like split up notes individually, because otherwise I'll screw up. Um, I'll either under aim or over aim the linear bits of those kinds of older maps. The main thing about it really is that like there's more than I think there's more than two ways to read any sort of pattern in the game. So it's like, okay, I read this pattern in one way, this doesn't work. So I'll try it in this way. But that doesn't work either. Just because those two ways doesn't work, that doesn't mean you can't play the map. There's always a different way to go about a map, in to my mind at least. And I think that's the biggest takeaway with especially with weird gimmicky things is that there's an infinite amount of ways almost to process what's going on.
And okay, you mentioning like super gimmicky stuff makes me think about like the sliders that are like way more complicated than like how you actually play them. Like
Sure.
they look like they're super crazy. They take up half your screen or something, but in reality, you kind of just touch. You just hit the start circle and then maybe fling your cursor in one way, but it's not nearly as complicated. Um, but do you have any thoughts on like I guess getting overwhelmed by slider shapes and how that can affect focus and reading and mind block?
Well, I will say that I think playing those maps as exactly the way they're meant to be played is a very good way to improve your fundamentals and thus, to my mind, improve your ability to get past mind block. Because I think playing maps at like exactly the way the mapper intended them, even if they're extremely hard, is a very um it can be a very difficult thing to do, sometimes even an impossible thing to do. And I
And
think
I,
doing those sorts of things that you're not used to doing is very useful in that way.
But I do want to clarify, I guess, when you're talking about like playing the map how the intender or how the playing the map how the mapper intended.
Like if a
Um,
map has a bunch of super fast sliders, follow every slider to its slider end, even if it's easier to cheese it.
I see. So putting a lot of focus on playing stuff like that properly can give you, um, I guess, like trying to sort of summarize what you say or what you said. It sort of gives you a clearer way to read the map, or like
Yes.
it strengthens your reading ability as a whole. Is that something you'd agree
Yes,
with?
because then when you don't want to play it, like play every slider to its full end, then as you say, playing like tapping the slider head and then only aiming a little bit, and then just like playing it for a full combo instead of doing it like that is way easier, if that makes sense. It's kind of like taking the weight off at the end of a baseball bat.
Oh, oh, true. um, so I want to touch a little bit on. I think you mentioned that there's at least two different ways to read like any pattern in the game, right? 'Cause I think if nothing else, like the most basic pattern is probably like two circles, and even then you can read it as just like two circles grouped, or like two separate individual circles that you focus on one at a time, right?
Mhm.
Um, so what are the most common, I guess, like patterns of chunking in your experience? I mean, I guess to clarify what I'm trying to ask is like you can group in like twos, right? Like straight lines, or you can group in threes, which is basically like triangles or disjointed triangles or like very obtuse triangles, right? Um,
Yeah.
and then also I think just like reading individual notes. Um, so is there anything else that you think is um, common? And you can talk about streams a little bit as well, like different ways to chunk streams.
Um, streams for me, and this might not come as a surprise. Reading streams is a bit of an enigma because I've heard some of the best players say that like if a stream gets really mega uber spaced, that they're able to read one note at a time in that stream, and I've never been able to do that personally.
That is crazy. Yeah, I cannot
But
imagine that.
and I any the hard thing about streams is that I think if you try to chunk streams, at least when I try to chunk streams, that makes me either over aim or under aim because I guess the segments in between those chunks, I tend to screw up the
Th-
transitions, I guess, in between the chunks.
I
Like that's
see.
where I mess up personally.
Oh, I see. So, actually, in that sense, I want to ask you about cut streams as well. Um,
Okay.
do you have any strategies for like reading that in a certain way, or like do you try to chunk them?
I definitely try to emphasize like if a cut stream is new comboed like in groups of four, then I will try to put very specific emphasis on the transition from the four to the one. Like if nothing else, I get that right because the movement from like through the two and the three tends to just work out. Like
Right,
that seems like a weird thing to say, but like compared to the cuts themselves, the rest of the movement is pretty easy. So I just
right,
sort of take it for granted, and it ends up being okay. So emphasizing the movement from the four to the one is absolutely um the move, in my opinion.
right. No, yeah, I definitely think I think that's a pretty common approach. So I'm glad to see that there is some consensus there. Obviously, I want to clarify as well that it doesn't mean that that's the only way to read cut
No,
streams,
no, no,
right?
no.
But if it's not something that you've tried before, I think the real important thing is that we sort of show you different ways of reading or just playing the game in general that are possible, not necessarily like a better way of reading or anything like that. So yeah, just another
Can we agree that
forewarning.
chunking is basically adding different new combos to the map in your mind?
Oh
Is
yeah,
that something you can agree on? Okay.
yeah. Um, and that also is a pretty clear definition, I would say, if to anyone who's still sort of confused. Um, so I want to break away from reading a bit as well and talk about if you think there are any other elements that go into mind block or fixing mind block aside from reading.
Um, I'm trying to think about how tapping can be tied into it and sort of like if bad habits from your tapping can um get tied into mind block. And honestly, I it's hard for me to come up with a definitive answer to that
Okay.
personally.
No, no. I mean, saying that there's really nothing else other than reading is a valid answer as well. I was just sort of
Okay.
curious if you had anything in mind, because yeah, definitely, I think that's been a common theme is that there's a lot of reading emphasis involved in fixing mind block, but yeah. But on the bright side, that means it's not that complicated. If you can figure out your reading,
Yeah.
you should be good. Um,
I'm trying to I'm I guess if anything else it would be reading an AR that's too fast for you. but that's just to my mind a completely separate issue
Right.
compared to um, reading something correctly, quote unquote, and still messing it up.
Right. And how do you distinguish that actually? Distinguishing between, an actual mind block and just something that's too hard for you?
Um, hmm.
Do you think like you would just kind of be able to tell?
Honestly, well, if I to my mind, if you're under aiming, then that is very rarely a mind block. So
Oh,
if you're watching yourself back and you're under aiming, I mean it could be, but if you're playing something that's a star above your comfort zone, then
right.
odds are it's not.
I think
It a mind block would probably more so be I don't know. What were you
um
gonna say?
I guess I don't know. I'll suggest a an answer, and I'll sort of see how much you agree with it. Is I think it depends on your comfort level, like just how comfortable you feel on that pattern and also the patterns around it. If it feels like it's something that you would otherwise be able to play just fine, and that actually goes back to your initial definition of mind block as well. So we're
Mm,
probably on the same page here, but yeah, if not, if it feels like the map in general is just uncomfortable or you really have to push your limits, maybe your mechanical skill or something like that, in order to just play the map, then chances are just improving your overall skill level is what's going to help you get a better score, not necessarily that there's any mind block there. Um,
I
but
suppose it's possible that a pattern is either hard enough or just spaced enough that you only have the wherewithal to read it in one particular way, and you don't know how to read it in any other way, and that could be a potential problem, I suppose.
oh, okay, that is actually a very good point. You just made me realize. Oh my god, enlightenment, Osu enlightenment. Um, so okay, so that whole idea of if a map's too hard for you, then you really just have to raise your skill level to be able to play it.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say people who spammed things like Big Black, Airman when they were too like
Uh-oh, the
inexperienced.
big black end of the conversation.
Like those people who played that map over and over before they were really able to play it skill wise, and now they're mind blocked on it. Now that they're much better players. Um, and what you made me sort of connect the dots is that like when you play a map that's completely way too hard for you, it's not even that you only have one way of reading it, it's that like you have zero ways of reading it, right? So your brain is not really engaged much at all with the map. Um, and if you keep reinforcing that, then eventually your brain's just going to stop trying to engage with reading the map at all. And you'll just be like, oh, yeah, the big black. I have no way of reading that. The map's way too hard for me. And just that memory and that practice of like every time you see those certain patterns, you shut your brain off because you're like, I have no way of reading this. Um,
Hmm.
Even though you've developed your skill to the point where obviously you can read it, but um, yeah, in that sense, just understanding this idea of like finding multiple ways to, I guess, digest the patterns in a way that, or like process the patterns, is I think really important for that reason, especially for mind blocks that have been with you for many many years or since you were a new player.
Hmm.
But yeah, do you have any other thoughts on that or fixing mind blocks
Um,
that are like very very old?
I will say when I was um grinding for an FC of that map myself, there were there were some of those freaking the big black slider
Yeah,
jumps.
yeah, yeah.
I I probably read those in every conceivable way before I found a way to hit it sometimes consistently maybe. So, I guess to maybe circle back to some of the the issue of sight read magic, quote unquote, and like if you get mind blocked, don't give up. Like the best thing you can do, in my opinion, in terms of fixing your mind block is just sort of ironically like putting a lot of time into fixing it and like almost brute forcing your way out of it. Like you're not going to be mind blocked when you hit a pattern. It's as simple as that. I mean, I think that's something that Idke said a while ago. Is like, let me get rid of this mind block by hitting this pattern.
Oh,
So I think that um, what was the question about like if people are mind blocked that it's an excuse for their bad reading?
right. Like,
So
do you think mind block is something that people make up to have an excuse for their bad reading?
I mm, well just because it's an excuse doesn't mean that it isn't real. But
Right.
if they're saying like if they're saying that they've to my mind they've sort of given up on trying to seriously get better at least to a certain degree.
So going back to what you said about like just hitting a pattern to get rid of the mind block, do you think that in a sense, and I'll just again sort of suggest this and see if you agree or not, but just hitting a pattern once can restore your confidence in your ability to hit it, um, in a sense.
Yeah, it absolutely can. If a mind block is bad, it might not be that easy, but I think probably two times out of three, um, if you hit a pattern once, it the mind block gets decently ridden of pretty instantly.
Yeah, and I think another reason why that might happen is like once you hit the pattern correctly, you have a point of reference for like a way to hit it that works rather than playing it over and over and missing over and over. You have all these points of reference of like what doesn't work. But once you do it correctly once, then you can look back on that replay even and sort of see and I guess
Mhm.
compare that to, some failed attempts of trying to hit the pattern and see what the difference is and see exactly what you did that time that worked that didn't work the other times. And another thing I want to mention that you said about brute forcing a map, um, I guess just a sort of fair warning, you have to sort of brute force in the right way. And
Yeah.
by that, I mean, um, hey, brute force, there's a difference between brute forcing different solutions until one of them works and brute forcing like the same thing over and over again. Um, like just repeating the same thing, hoping that it'll eventually work versus like, let's say there's 20 different conceivable ways to read a certain pattern and you brute force try each of the 20 ways of reading the pattern until one of them works. I think that's probably more of what you meant by brute forcing.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Right. So yeah, just a fair warning there that there's a difference between there's definitely a difference between brute forcing like different solutions until one of them works and throwing your head against the wall 100 times. So
It's the same distinction between playing more and playing more smart, I guess.
right.
That's like a caveman way of putting it, but like
um but yeah, do you have any, I guess, like, as because I feel like we've not necessarily been all over the place, but there's been sort of information overload to a certain extent. Yeah. Do you have any, I guess, like key takeaways that you want to emphasize from anything that we've mentioned so far?
if there's one thing, it's um to help a mind block problem, learn how to read a simple patterns in many different ways. And um I did want to bring this up about easy, where at like I mentioned how with easy there's less of an emphasis on accuracy. Well, that's
Right.
more than made up for with the difficulty in, like you said, um, pattern processing.
Right.
And I know like a lot of people don't want to spam easy over and over. Like they just people can put easy on a map. It's like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Like it just sort of it gates them.
Right.
But just maybe doing that a few times a day could really change perspective on how pattern processing can work. So yeah, if there's one
Right.
thing, reading patterns in different ways helps get rid of mind block, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that um, definitely if there's one thing that's sort of been a common takeaway from all the interviews, that has definitely been that as well.
Okay.
I do want to emphasize um, in the sense of like playing easy for the sake of getting better at pattern processing slash chunking slash reading patterns in different ways, whatever you want to call it. Um, you don't necessarily, and this is sort of what you were trying to say as well, I think, you don't necessarily have to play easy to improve those skills. But
Yeah.
the thing is that easy has a much stronger requirement for that in order to process the patterns correctly with such, so many objects on the screen at once. It forces you to be a lot better at that skill. So while it's certainly possible to take a pattern that's like AR9, AR9.5, maybe even AR10, and chunk it into like multiple bits, uh, it is it sort of I don't know. It's like learning to swim by just swimming in the kiddie pool all the time, right? versus versus in a pool that's fit for your height. Um, so it forces you to really challenge yourself, and that is, I think, where or how you improve the most. At anything really, but yeah,
And I think that's not for everyone. Like there definitely are some players out there who no matter how hard they try, they cannot like it would be really hard for them to really use that um to their advantage, I guess.
I mean,
Whether that's from like just like from from mindset, I guess. Like it would be really hard for them to really methodically look at easy and be like, huh, this is what I have to do, I guess.
right. I mean, it takes time too. It's its own skill to develop it for sure.
Hmm.
So, um, but yeah, very good points. I think now is probably a good time to shift over to viewer questions. I think it's been around 45 minutes almost.
Almost exactly.
Yeah. Um, okay, so yeah, those of you listening live, if you go to the Discord server, there's a text thread called live chat, where you can drop your questions. And what we'll do is if you see someone else's question that you also would want asked, if you could put a thumbs up +1 emoji so that we can keep track of all of them. Um, but I guess while questions come in, oh wait, there's one question already. So a question from Joanne who asks, I have a cut stream related question. How do I not lose all finger control on 1/3 and 1/6 cut streams, since the cuts after 3 notes feel very unnatural? So cut streams that are in triples, right? Um,
Yes.
how do you not lose finger control?
Well, I think at the very least, the rule about emphasizing the movement between the cuts, I think that still applies. So instead of focusing on the 4-to-1, I think focusing on the 3-to-1 is still applicable. But I recognize that like if there's a group of three, then it's really hard to start one chunk on one finger and then start the next chunk on the other. Um, I'm trying to decide whether it would be better to learn how to like just hit the pattern at all and then from there learn how to hit it more efficiently or play it I guess like playing a two groups of three as two triples even though the rhythm is not that would not represent that or just playing it as naturally as you possibly can. I'm trying to decide which of those two methods would be better.
Uh,
Do you have an opinion personally?
Are you basically saying like just being able to hit it by cheesing and then using that as a sort of confidence booster in a
Basis.
sense?
Yeah.
Um, One thing I do want to propose and sort of get your opinion on is like I think, and I guess that this question sort of strays a bit away from Mindblock, but I think that's okay. Um,
Hmm.
but I think streams that are like cut streams in thirds, or that are grouped in threes, it's all about so like one cut you're starting on one finger, and then the other cut you're starting on your other finger, and that fact that you're starting some of them on your other finger, or maybe the finger that you're less comfortable starting patterns on, is the culprit. Like that's what you need to focus on, is being able,
Mm-hmm.
like, if you are comfortable starting patterns on both of your fingers, then that is not even a problem that's going to exist for you. Because it won't throw your finger control off if starting patterns on either finger is something that's comfortable for you. So what what I would recommend is, if you get better at starting patterns with your other finger in general, and this is probably assuming that you single tap with a certain finger, or if not, even if you full alt, there might be a certain finger that you tend to lean towards in starting patterns. So the other finger that you're less comfortable starting on, if you practice starting every pattern and burst and things like that with that finger, and train, or I guess sort of get that finger up to speed with your dominant tapping finger, starting finger, um, that usually alleviates the problem, at least in my experience.
Okay.
Because at least in my understanding, that's sort of what the core of the problem is. Is
Sort of like like balance in a way.
right, right. Because you can probably hit the start of the cut stream fine, and then once the first cut happens where you have to start that chunk on your other finger, that's sort of what throws people off most commonly. So, um,
$1 million question. $1 million problem.
yeah, there is a lot. I'm not sure if you've thought, or if you have many ideas on like the different types of tapping. Basically, because people say there's like two different types of alternating. There's one that's more like single tapping, and then one that's more like flowy stream type. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. More or
Um,
less.
right. Yeah, that's a whole nother tangent. That is like a whole nother interview week's worth of discussion. But um, yeah, just food for thought.
And there
Um,
is always like, just to be thorough with our point on reading patterns in different ways, there is always like, if there's a set, like, you have a 1/3 stream and it's 7 notes and it's grouped like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. There's always reading it like 1 2 1 2 1 2 1, if
oh,
that makes sense.
that is a good point.
Because then um that big gap, that
Where the cut is, right?
difficult, yeah, the big gap where the cut is, where you're saying is the biggest issue, that's just its own jump. It's its own 1 2. That's something that would help me a lot personally.
So basically, instead of the chunks being in thirds, even though the notes are cut in threes, if you group them into twos, then instead
I
of
think the hardest part of that pattern would become more digestible.
okay, that is a very good point. Yeah, thank you for $1 million answer. um, okay, another question that came in from Sui, who asked, "Have you ever had experience with mind blocking a certain slider on a tech map? How would you go about overcoming that?"
Hmm. I think a certain slider is going to need a little more specification, unfortunately.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, is it like mind blocking the slider head? Is it aiming the slider tick? Is it like in the middle of a jump?
I
Like
do.
what?
Yeah, I do want to say I think the most important thing to focus on when aiming sliders is the slider head, the
Mhm.
start circle, right? The part that you actually have to click in order to activate the slider. Because that once you hit that, the rest of the slider is very lenient, um, and it doesn't require nearly as much accuracy. Um, and I went in depth as to why in the slider aim section of OCPHD if you really want to get into the nitty gritty. But yeah, basically, the slider head is the part that you have to focus on the most. Chances are, if you're really getting mind blocked on reading sliders, it's because you're treating the whole slider as one object that you have to aim towards, rather than the slider head as being what you have to aim towards, and then the slider body is like sort of the little dance that you do with your cursor afterwards. So Um,
Yeah, I guess if you can't hit the slide, if you have a hard time hitting the slider head, then you're gonna have a hard time aiming the rest of the slider. So like one thing and then the next, I guess if that is what you're saying.
right,
Like get a basis first.
right, and try not to get too distracted by the slider body, because if you don't hit the slider head in the first place, then the slider body doesn't matter. You've already broken your combo. So,
Mm.
um,
I, I guess it's like if you're worried about getting really bad accuracy on a map like that because you're dropping a bunch of slider ends, odds are that the only person who is going to care is you. Like that's the way I would. That's what would help me at least. It's like, oh my god, everyone's on my friends list is gonna see that I have really bad ack on this slide, and no one's gonna care. I
and
don't think.
you're especially talking about dropping slider ends,
Yeah, yeah. Like if you
right?
get an FC with like 88% ack and your max combo is 50 or 60 off of the max combo, like th- I think doing that is better than just slider breaking everywhere.
Right, especially in tournaments.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so another question that came in from Blue Boss, who asked, I have a tendency to be mind blocked on a random speed up in different tech maps. It's usually a manageable BPM to a sudden speed burst that always surprises me. Is there any way to cheese these or get around them? So basically, a tech map maybe being around 175 BPM, and then all of a sudden it just jumps up in speed. That tends to sort of surprise you, and sometimes you get mind blocked on that. Do you have any tips for that?
Mm. Uh, hmm. I Well, that's one of those things I suppose where that's a hard question. That's a very hard question because that like comes into a lot of, I guess, music like what's the word? Like being very got it. The word fails me.
Uh oh. I do want to mention though. I think like if you like you mentioned, so the typically the BPM is manageable for you in that map, and then suddenly there's a speed burst that causes you trouble. Um, one thing, and this is just a possibility, but one thing that could be happening is that you get like overwhelmed by the difficulty, and something in your brain goes like, the same thing that we were talking about with like um trying to play a map that's way too hard for you as a new player. Your brain just kind of goes like, I have no way of playing this map or this pattern, and like that pattern was just really hard, and you like accept that you yeah you like accept, yeah, ACCEPT, accept, you accept that as like just how that pattern is, rather than taking the time to digest the pattern and figure out how it's actually played. So you start with the map, you get to that really tricky speed up burst pattern, and you're like, oh my god, I cannot read that. Um, and then you get to it again, and you're like, oh, here's the pattern that I couldn't read, and I but basically instead of being like, let me try to break it down and try to figure out how to actually read it, you're just like, okay, here's the pattern that I can't read, that I cannot read, and then hopefully I'm making sense.
I think this
Basically,
question is mind blocking us.
um, basically you have to be careful to not shut down your brain from your initial conclusion that you couldn't read that map. Is what I'm trying to say. So, um, yeah, ultimately it comes back to taking the time to process what you did wrong and fix that. So,
Or something that could help is like looking in the editor and going through that part a few times and tapping along, or even making a practice diff for that part, and getting that muscle memory, I guess, ingrained at least a little bit.
oh yeah, yeah, watching the map played successfully. There was one time that I did this. So there was a map in a tournament named Gengaozo Fun. You know what map I'm talking about, KTG Stir. Um, and I could not figure it. It was like it's like cut doubles and like quads and like very strange.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It's got like a gray background. And I could not figure it out, but I had to play it for a tournament. And so thankfully that map is ranked, so there's people, incredible players that have good scores on that map. And GN had an FC with really good accuracy. I don't remember what it was, but it was like he could definitely actually play the map. So, and just watching his replay helped me figure out like it sort of have a point of reference to model my own gameplay. So, um, yeah, that is something you can try if you're really struggling on a map. Watch either maybe not auto mod, but maybe full combo on the map or like something like that. Watch
You are
someone.
not alone in this game.
Yeah, you are not
You are not
alone.
alone.
As much as it is a single player game, it is also a multiplayer game. So,
God, I always just call that Jen Gaozo. I never realized it was Jen Gaozo Foon.
oh, yeah. Thank you for linking the map, by the way. Um, okay, this is a good question from BS4. Tips for not getting mind block from star rating. Example: I can play 3 stars comfortably, but I can't pass 4 stars simply because they are 4 stars, and I get scared.
I
So,
like that's a very innocent question. I
but
like
it is
that.
actually very common. I feel like.
It is. It is.
But do you have any tips for that?
Um, I think at least to a certain extent, know that the star rating system is inherently flawed. Like maybe not as much at the 3 or 4 star level, but um know that the difference between like increasing star ratings is not really black and white, I guess.
Right. I think
And I
a good way to sort of conceptualize it is like the star rating is not subject, or it's not created by a human. It's created by like an automated system that tries to guess how hard that map is. Usually it does a
mhm.
decent job, but keep in mind that it is ultimately up to your own judgment as to like how hard that map is. So
There
um
are some skins that skin out the um star rating on the panel side of the
oh
screen.
right.
I mean, I don't think there's a way to block it out, the number
Right.
on the on
The
the
top
top
left.
left, but there are ways, there are skins that just get rid of that on a certain part of the screen. If I could find one, I could link it, but that would at least be a band-aid fix.
Right. If you're really getting scared out, or spooked out by star rating, but yeah. Ultimately, um, and another thing is like if nothing else, over time you will just kind of become more and more comfortable with um like 4 stars. Like the first time you play 4 star, of course it might feel a bit overwhelming, but once you dip your toes in the water, um, actually, okay, shoot, I was gonna say because you know how like um getting into a cold pool of water is a lot easier if you just jump in versus like trying to go in slowly.
Mm,
So
mm.
I was gonna say just jump right in and don't be scared, but actually, I don't want people to take that the wrong way and just like play 9 stars.
H1.
um, but yeah, the point is, it's not as bad as you might think it is, and if you don't believe me, then um, just take it slowly, and over time, yeah, you can definitely do it. If other people out there, if many thousands of other players have made it that far in their skill in this game, then you definitely can too. So,
I'll also
um,
say that there's no shame in putting on no fail for a map that you can't pass.
right, yeah, um, much agreed. Okay, let's see a couple more questions. Okay, let's see. Um, and if you see any other questions as well, Woey. Oh yes, someone asked about mutuals. I would say tell Peppy to increase the friend list limit and come back to me because that has been an issue for a lot of longtime OSU players.
Suffering from success. I have
Oh,
too many friends.
all right. Listen, man. um, okay. Let's see. Someone mentioned earlier it was Striker who mentioned um randomly double tapping with like triples or quads on like very high ARs, because like you just don't
Mm.
read it too quickly. I will mention, um, and this is sort of a shout out slash reveal type thing. But the next interview series that we're doing in like around 2 weeks, 3 weeks is going to be all about high AR. So save your question for then. Hopefully, we'll be able to go in depth on that. Okay, let's see. Dragon Z asks question about Usumania. Oh, are you talking about flipping? Oh, okay. So, Dragons is asking a question about like basically flipping your monitor upside down. Um,
Uh-oh.
yeah.
This is gonna be my hottest take, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, what the question is like in Mania, in Usumania, there's a way to flip the visual of the um, I guess basically a mod that flips the playfield without actually changing the difficulty. So yeah, there is something that people do. I think the community has coined the term like Australian method because it's upside down.
Yeah.
But basically, you go into your monitor's visual settings and you flip the display to be upside down. Um, so that like doesn't change the difficulty of the map, but it does flip it pretty much just like Hard Rock would. Yeah, what is your opinion on that, Woey?
I don't think that's a good thing to rely on,
Oh no,
personally. I
I
mean, it's
I would
it's
agree.
it's 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 like I wouldn't judge anyone for like doing that in order to set a score, but to my mind, it's like playing as Thanos in the Elder Scrolls. Like it's kind of the same game, but you can't say it's the same thing.
Interesting. So I mean, I don't know. There's things we can talk about. I know for a while people were like, oh, being left-handed has like advantages on certain maps, and like being left-handed inherently makes you better at aim, for example. I think the sort of conspiracy started because like Whitecat and Emmerich were rank 1 and 2, so and they're both
Mhm.
left-handed tablet players, but um yeah. I will. I guess to answer your question, because the question is that like, do you think OC Standard would benefit from having a mod that flips the screen? And in reality, I guess you can do that by flipping your monitor orientation upside down, which is what people do. So
I feel like if someone sets a play like that, it's like totally valid, but it should
right,
also have like a footnote, like an asterisk. Like in a perfect world, like this this was done in order for this to exist.
right, like the touchscreen mod that got added.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, okay, actually, okay, this is an interesting question because we haven't actually touched on this. But looking in the editor, so Jawan asks, when you usually don't sight read a section or a certain pattern correctly, do you prefer looking over it in the editor or playing it over again or watching someone else play it?
I personally absolutely prefer looking at something in the editor. Like, I think old maps taught me this, where a note will be just literally snapped wrong or mistimed enough to be like, huh, okay. Look at the edit, like look at the measures at the top of the screen and see how they like relate to each other and how close they are, how far maybe they actually are. I think looking in the editor is very smart. It's very useful.
Yeah, there's definitely much more that you can learn from looking at the editor because the editor is basically like it's almost like looking at the source code um or like looking at the raw data of like the actual map object placements and timing and things like that. So um, yeah, definitely much advised. The editor, actually, if you guys have never opened the editor before, it might look a little scary, but um,
That's
it is
true.
it is simple. I think mess around with it if nothing else. There are some guides on how the editor works and things like that, but yeah, definitely spend some time messing around with the editor if you never have before, because it's not as bad as it might look, and it is very very helpful for processing patterns that are very tricky for you to read. Um, okay, there's one question that came in on the forum during the interview, which was very interesting. But a question from Deremi, who asked, and this is a pretty quick question, I feel like, but is
Remy,
D- D-
Coro?
Derem Derami?
Oh shit.
Yeah, who asks, is perma mind block a real thing?
No.
Any further elaboration?
No.
Yeah, I think the general consensus is that mind block is obviously something that you can overcome, and that's sort of been the theme of a lot of these um, interviews. Obviously, is fixing mind block and getting over mind block. But definitely, yeah, I think another general consensus of all these interviews is that mind block is always something that you can fix. So
Mind over matter, baby.
let's go. Um, but yeah, any last things that you want to shout out? I think, yeah, I mean, unless you have something to bring up, I think now might be a good time to start wrapping up.
That uh that sounds fine with me. I mean,
Oh,
I think I think coming across the thing about the realization of reading on like reading a certain pattern only one way. I think once we came to that, there was sort of like everything else was just sort of trickling off of that realization.
right. So
So
yeah, definitely, I think that is the major key takeaway from this interview. But yeah, I do want to thank you for joining the interview, Woey. Thank you as well.
yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I feel like I was a little bit rambly at
No,
times,
no, you're
and I
good.
appreciate that you like when I was you were able to parse it very well.
Oh, okay,
So
thank you.
thank you for that.
Um, but yeah, it is always nice to hear insights from players like you. So I appreciate you taking the time. But yeah, those of you listening um, to the recording, either on YouTube or Spotify, if you want to get directly involved in these interviews or with OSU University as a whole, best thing you can do is join our Discord server, where you can ask live questions during interviews and just get involved with us in general. If you want to support us, the best thing you can do is simply to share the content with anyone you think might like it. It really goes a long way, a lot more than you might think. Um, but yeah, we appreciate you guys listening. Definitely check out the YouTube channel / Spotify playlist for the other interviews that we've done so far. And those of you listening live, especially, stay tuned. Join us tomorrow at 15 UTC for the final wrap up / Q&A panel interview session of Mindblock Week. So look forward to that. Thank you again, Woey, for being here today. From oh shoot, from I just hit my microphone. From what I understand, you won't be here tomorrow.
I'll try my best.
But right, but even if not, we might see you around in future OS University content as well. So
Ooh, I hope so.
yeah, look forward to that. Um, but yeah, thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.